I mean, it's really nice actually to get the opportunity to talk at this point. It feels like a real privilege because I think you can see the threads building together through the day. So I kind of get to draw them together a little bit, I think, and then launch us into your last bit, looking at some of the new research evidence coming in. I don't know if you've been as struck as I have about how much of what's been coming through today draws out that theme of building up the evidence base, using research, using targeting, using information, understanding how and why, as well as what works, and building all those things together. I just think it's brilliant, and it's brilliant that this partnership that was presented first thing this morning, and the other partnerships that have been talked about are becoming more sustainable as well. They seem to be things that are really growing roots into academia and into police forces, these partnerships, police officers becoming the ones who are leading studies themselves, as well as academics leading studies working with them. And I can feel all those threads coming together really quite strongly. So I feel, I think the academics who were doing the evaluation of the What Works crime reduction stuff that we've been doing called it green shoots. I think they're a bit more than shoots. I can see some buds and even some things opening, but then I'm that kind of person, so I tend to see very much the positive and everything. But I do think we have got some amazing work being done. And one of the things I just wanted to say a little bit about was how it sort of seems to build. Oh, it's very echoey, isn't it? Sorry about that, yeah. I'll talk a bit more quietly. Does that help? No. It's just is echoey. I think maybe I'll move that. Can you turn it down a tiny bit? Will that work? Just move it down a little bit. It's not that one. Okay. I will carry on then. The first thing I was struck by when I was listening today was I was thinking about our What Works toolkit. So one of the things we do in the college, we've got sort of 3 chunks of activity, kind of, sort of. There's lots of other bits as well, but this is a way of trying to describe what we do to help ourselves keep it simple. So knowledge, education and standards. And the first part of what I was going to say was just focusing on some of the knowledge gathering and labelling that we've done. If you haven't seen our toolkit, I was very pleased the other day, somebody from an OPCC's office said that she was using it to help think about the investment that they were making in their local area. So if you Google What Works Crime College, it will pop up, you'll be able to find the toolkit. And in there you'll see there's a summary of the evidence on second responder reviews. But most of that evidence is American. So what's great about this morning's trial is it adds now to that evidence base, gives us a trial that's been done here, helps us to understand what the issues and context would be in this country. And you can see a lot of the systematic reviews, so those things that are done when all of the results of research are drawn together into one place. You look at the results across a number of different trials, add them all up together, see what that gives you. You'll see a lot of it is international. So it's really helpful when people add to that evidence base and also help us understand how does it work. Because a lot of the there's sometimes some real debate in academia, people get quite angry about too much focus on just what works and not enough on how it works. And we try and bring those two things together and think about both. And that's what we try and represent in the toolkit as well. So if you haven't seen it, I'd encourage you to have a look and think about adding to it. So if you look at it and see that it doesn't answer your question, which it probably won't, because you will have another question to all of the questions that have been asked there already, it will be really helpful to think about, could you test something? Could you add to that evidence base? Could you create something that would help fill the gaps that you can see in that knowledge base? We also have a research map on there. So if you are setting out on new research, and you could let us know about that research so that we can know about events like this, keep tabs on studies as they're developing, tell other people about them and say, did you know if you're doing a study on that, there's another one in Hampshire or somebody else is doing something in Leicestershire. So the research map, you can also Google, you'll find things on there that you might want to carry on and work with others to do. So that was the sort of knowledge building bit I wanted to say. So it's really exciting because there are some funds out there. I mean, people have been mentioning funding, but a lot of people are finding ways to do this with little pots of money here and there. They're doing local studies. There's some national funds that are being helpful, but I think it's amazing how creative people are being in terms of building that evidence base, which is brilliant. The second bit I was going to talk about was the education bit. I was smiling to myself when Zoe was talking about MLE. I think it does get bad rep, online training, but used in the right way can be useful for certain things and not others. Catherine might say a bit more about that because she's done some stuff on body worn, and she's doing some current work that I think is interesting in that area. But anyway, one of the pieces that we have been doing about face-to-face training is this piece on coercive control identification, and really concentrating on that as the gap piece, the bit that was a bit missing, which was really thinking about how do we help officers do the really difficult bit. So it's not just about saying, okay, here's a tick list of risk factors. I don't need to tell you this. It's not just the tick list of risk factors issue anyway. It's the how do you encourage and help officers to do that other type of activity, which is really thinking through the issues around coercive control. I kind of agree with Zoe. You know, this is something that there's a lot to be said for debating and discussing it together. But for other things, sometimes you might want to get people to do stuff online to just get the knowledge in their head before you have the conversation with them. So I think you can use the things together. So there's a little bit more to say on that, I think. But anyway, standards, also mentioned by Zoe. And the question I thought was a very good one to set me off on a little bit of talking about standards. We are trying to take a very firm line about not wanting to set standards if we don't know what the evidence base says. Because if you set a standard and you set it in the wrong place and you consistently get everybody doing the wrong thing, that could be a harmful thing to do. Now, if we're not prepared to take that risk nationally, and we think that there is a very strong case to be made for moral grounds, or we've all reached consensus that we want to set a standard anyway, without the evidence base, we're very happy to have that conversation and think about how we could do that. But we want to try to take a strong line, to say if we've got strong evidence that we should set the standard that will be inspected against in a particular place, let's do that, great. And let's argue with each other and debate and discuss and try and reach the right standard if we don't think that evidence is there. We're just doing some pilots on a very thorough way of doing that, on officer safety and investigative interviewing as the starting pilots. And we'll do some also on neighbourhood policing and the evidence based on neighbourhood policing shortly as well. If anybody wants to get involved in any of that activity or help us, help and argue with us and critique what's going on, we're always very interested to hear from people who want to get involved in that activity, because we're going to be doing what they call guidelines committees to build that up. So somebody else was saying it's very warm in here. I'm now agreeing with you that it's warm. I was fine until I stopped. Now I'm baking. Right, I will. I might move that mic and take my jacket off. So that was the second thing I wanted to say about education, and then about standards, and then also to say a little bit about how we put those things together. So, oh, come on, little machine.
Would you like me to do
there we go.
For you so it's full screen?
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't know that is that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, duh.
Press F5. Yeah.
Or it's because I couldn't see it. Thank you. Yeah. If you can scroll down, that's brilliant. Thank you. So
Press F5. Yeah.
is it the magic?
Come out of that screen. Yeah. Is it popping up?
Yay.
No.
Anyway, you can get previews of the next slide. It makes it more, you can kind of speculate on what I'm going to say next. That's fine by me. The connecting it all together stuff is what we are also trying to do for the big national programmes and priorities. So, of course, domestic abuse, stop and search, mental health, body-worn video. In all of those areas, we've tried to do all of those things together. So let's summarise and sift through the evidence first. Think about whether or not there should be standards set and what education and training might be helpful to officers and staff from all of that, and try and put it all together as a package. So we'll probably this year be doing some work on wellbeing, and we're doing some broader based work on vulnerability as well. But there's a long old, I mean, a lot of the people in this room will know there's a long way to go to actually do that kind of work systematically for everything we've got to cover in policing.
Now you've got your notes done.
Hey. So what was I going to say now? No, it's my fault because I didn't send them in advance, to be fair to colleagues here. So which is why I'm doing them straight off the laptop. Thank you. That's kind of you. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was how, and this relates to this thing about changing culture, and how this is part of a sort of bigger movement, I think, in policing. There are more and more officers and staff who are doing this themselves. who are thinking about studies, who are testing things. A lot of the people who did the work on CARA, working with Heather, were people who were doing master's studies themselves, police officers and police staff, looking. The fascinating bit about how they did what they did in the CARA sessions was all done by a guy called Tony Rowlandson, police officer who managed to convince the Chantal from the charity to let him sit in the room. There's a really interesting set of stuff there about cultures and working together, but he then was able to really understand and be better at explaining to a police audience what was actually going on in those sessions. That was all about the sort of how of it. So there's more and more of that going on. We're trying to encourage that by putting it into the curriculum, encouraging it through the selection processes, all sorts, having bursary funds. But there's more to it than that, I think, and we have to try and encourage everybody to think about how they can be part of using research evidence and building research evidence and testing things. I think because there's what I would say to Zoe and what we're discussing at the moment is that this balance between setting a standard and innovating is really tricky. But what we would like to offer is a way of people being able to register trials and tests with us. So we will provide you with a sort of peer review of your design, register it with us, and we will help make sure that we can get national confidence for you. Because you go back to that Hampshire example, it took them such an incredibly long time to get support to do CARA. I'm not saying we could necessarily speed it up that much, but we could have some national register of what's happening so that we can provide at least some sort of clarity with HMIC. Yes, this is a trial that has been registered. We know it's going on. It's been peer reviewed. The design's been peer reviewed. Let's crack on with it. Rather than saying, you shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't be testing that, and stopping people from innovating where sometimes in quite high risk and potentially contentious areas. So interested in views on that and what people will think about that possibility in the future. And then finally, this is, it's as I said, it's been really nice because it's so clear how all these elements fit together. They come out in every single presentation we've seen, I think. And this is the bit about wider partnership. We're one of the What Works centres, and we're increasingly doing much, much more work with the other ones. So NICE for public health in particular. Sometimes it's about language, isn't it? So public health people all talk about determinants of health. So if you want to get them interested in violence and violence reduction, you have to use determinants of health language, and then they'll know what you mean, and then they'll go, oh yes, determinants of health, yes, we agree with that. That's definitely an issue for us, blah. Early Intervention Foundation have done some really good work, as you will, many of you will know, on looking at what matters for children in terms of domestic violence. And then finally, we're also working with Education Endowment Foundation as well now, looking at what sorts of peer skills training can be helpful. Because again, some of the PHSE programmes are actually really well evidenced increasingly for providing some resilience for young people in terms of not wanting to get involved in some risky behaviours or the kinds of behaviours that others would see and they themselves would see as wrong. So yeah, I'll leap over that because I just wanted to finish up by saying I think I was really encouraged by what Polly was saying, and I think she's absolutely right. And I would connect that back to this joint What Works centre thing. I think we do need to work with public health colleagues. Interestingly, public health is starting to lend people into PCC's offices. So that could be quite positive. Seen that happen in Cambridgeshire and in Wigan. So people are starting to cross over between the two worlds, and I think that's going to be really, really positive for us. So I would support that, would encourage that. If anybody's got examples that they want to share back with us again of where they've got research coming in from these other fields that's useful in policing and crime reduction, please do let us know. And it's brilliant to see you all here engaged and wanting to hear more about what these terrific studies are telling us. So thanks for listening, and please do get in touch with us. It's you can just Google it, but it's College Contact Us is the way to get in touch with us. So yeah, thank you. Cheers.